We got the announcement, Cataclysm is happening. Yeah, this video is coming out like 10 minutes after I heard, okay? I was planning to make this video and I guess this is a better time as ever. We are doing the Cataclysm class picking guide. We're gonna break down every spec, every class, and we're gonna see what you should pick for this expansion. So take that, never Cataclysmers, take that, classic plusers, you got... Oh no, I broke my table. We're gonna start with the Mage here, okay? This one is pretty straightforward. You got 3 specs, right? You got Frost, you got Arcane, and you got Fire. This one is pretty simple actually. Frost is almost non-existent in PVE, so yeah, the damage is simply not there. Sometimes you will see some Mage taking Frost for some very particular mechanics in some very particular fights. For Ice Block mainly, Ice Block is busted, but that's about it. You may be seeing this mainly in tier 11. Conclave of Winds, for example, a great example. Ice Block can help you bypass like a mechanic of, I think is Rohash, the guy that like blows you up, and yeah, whatever. Frost, not very good, I probably wouldn't go for it. Arcane though is a very fast paced boom boom spec, you know, I kinda like it. The whole mechanic, the whole gimmick of it is that you're charging and discharging, right? Like some abilities generate mana, and some abilities burn a hell of a ton of mana. So you go like really fast, boom, 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 and then you go like, woo, you know, like Goku when he go like, and like he got like yellow stuff coming out of him and he turns into like stronger. Imagine the Arcane Mage like it. It's really fun. I think it's gonna be the first Mage spec that I'm gonna make a guide on. I love the Arcane Mage, but okay, you can't go wrong with Arcane. The only problem is that it doesn't scale very well, so by late tier 12 you're gonna start seeing the cracks showing because you're gonna get outperformed by Fire, okay? Now Fire is kinda like the opposite, is much slower. It ramps up damage over time. It is also pretty easy for Cataclysm standards, but the cool part of it is that you can use side mobs to boost your damage to the boss, okay? Imagine other additional adds as a battery for your damage. And by the way, you are gonna see, and I get this a lot when I talk about tier lists, you're gonna see a lot of people saying that Fire Mages are the best DPS in Cataclysm. That is true in some very particular fights where they can abuse this mechanic that I am talking about, okay? That's the crazy meters, that's where they come from, it's hilarious. But overall, the Fire Mage is a very in-demand class in Cataclysm. Arcane starts off strong and then falls off, and Fire becomes then the top of the line spec, but you gotta keep in mind that as a Mage in Cataclysm, you are probably gonna be the raid leader's slave, okay? If you wanna succeed in Cataclysm raiding as a Mage, you are probably gonna have to swap between Arcane, Fire and Frost depending what your raid needs for particular mechanics. And yeah, you're gonna have to be required to have double spec at all times for PVE. I see that as a downside, but at the same time, the Mage, very recommendable class overall, you can't go wrong. Next is the Paladin. Now, I always joke that Blizzard will never allow Paladins to be bad, but this video will absolutely not be the exception. Paladins are the favorite child of Blizzard, Cataclysm with all 3 specs being on top of the line in PvE. Yeah, okay, we got the Protection Paladin. I made a guide on the Protection Paladin, by the way, and perhaps the strongest tank in the expansion, especially late game, tier 13. There is not even the Blood Decay can compete with it once you get full beast. It's insane. Without a challenge though, they are easily the best of tank of the expansion the whole way through. Maybe besides pre-raid vesting slot, maybe the berries a little better on that, but overall, yeah, they destroy every single other off tank. They have absurd scaling, pretty fun and deceptively complex rotations, and every defensive cooldown you can imagine on top of a lot of utility. They are busted. They are one of my favorite tanks in the game, and you can't really miss anything when you're doing Protection Paladin. It's insane. Highly recommended. Then we got the Holy Paladin though, and it is almost mandatory to take a Holy Paladin into a 10-man raid. So there you go, if you wanna heal a 10-man, Holy Paladin, the way to go. Holy Paladin is hard to explain really. it's like a whack-a-mole of like tiny heals, okay? You're casting tiny heals by the gazillions really fast and you're like raid healing. They are somewhat decent at tank healing, but they can do both pretty well actually, and that is why exactly you take them in 10 men, because you cannot really have a dedicated raid healing into a raid of 10 people, you don't have the slots for it, but a class that can do both decently well, super important. And also the utility. They are not as useful in 25 man, but you are gonna see them in any respectable comp too. They are represented still. If I am being quite honest though, I kinda hate the holy gameplay. Like, if you play the Resto Druid in vanilla, in classic vanilla, you're gonna know what I mean. Like, you're casting like almost only one spell and like it's as a heal. It has no depth, nothing interesting about it, all over and over and over and over again, just like raid healing or tank healing. You can that's the funny part, right? You can tank heal and raid heal with the same freaking spell. Which, if I am not mistaken, it was Flash of Light. I don't know, I haven't played a Holy Paladin in Cataclysm in a while. I think it was Flash of Light. You know, the tiny heal? Like the one that is like Holy Light but shorter, that one. I hate the gameplay, some people love it, but what can I say, it's still good though. And of course we got the Red Paladin here, Hammer of Justice right here. I like to call it the Retadin because of all the player base that it attracts. And it is easy, it does a trillion damage, that's all you gotta know, right? If you can tie your shoelaces, you can play a Red Paladin at the top of the meters, okay? Blizzard will never allow Paladins to be bad. As a matter of fact, when Red Paladins were just okay in Wrath of the Lich King, they broke their no changes to ruin the balance just to make them good again, okay? You cannot, like, if you bet on Paladins with Blizzard, you're gonna win every single time. Alright, next class is the Rogue. I will admit, the Rogue is a class that I absolutely never play. It's the one class that I never ever play. I don't know why, I just think it's lame, I never liked it. As far as PVE goes though, it's pretty easy to break down too. Subtlety is pretty much non-existent, it gets outclassed by all the other specs and the damage is simply bad. It is not unplayable, but goddamn does it try to be unplayable. Assassination though is the single target and AoE spec, okay? This is in my opinion the most class fantasy fitting spec on the Rogue, you know? If you think of a Rogue, you're probably thinking of Assassination. They are bursty, they are mobile, and they do a crap ton of damage. They are the top spec. Combat, meanwhile, is like a much slower, more standard melee spec, okay? They are good at cleave damage, that's like the one thing they got over Assassination. Like when you're fighting 2 or 3 mobs, they are very good at that kind of fight. They are good at sustained damage more than burst damage, and that is an issue. Cataclysm is all about burst damage, the mechanics really reward burst damage. And also it is simply not my cup of tea, I think it looks lame. It is viable, it is acceptable, but you should play Assassination if you really want to try hard it. I will say though that everybody I ask tells me the same, that combat is way easier than Assassination. So if you like the Rogue aesthetic, the Rogue class, but you do not wanna be like a PhD in pressing the keyboard, you can play combat. I guess that you can do that. And you know, I kind of forgot actually, Rogues have access to double legendary weapons. If you play TBC, you know the glaives, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's pretty busted, so you got something to look forward to if you are gonna play a Rogue, okay? Now we're gonna take a look at the Druid here. Yeah, Druids are a super versatile class, and I personally always try to play a hybrid spec in expansions that have Dungeon Finder, because in my opinion, and I know people argue with me on this all the time, but in my opinion, it is literally faster to farm your DPS set, tanking or healing dungeons, than doing them as DPS because of the queue times. Also, I think I like having options, and Druid is the ultimate class as having options. You have 4 viable specs in Cataclysm to choose from, okay? We're gonna break down. First is the Feral Tank, okay? My all-time favorite class in Cataclysm to tank with. If you watch this channel, you probably saw me nerding out about the Feral Tank. I love the spec, and Cataclysm is also excellent. It is brain dead simple, super effective tank. You can do both main tanking and off tanking very competently. at the highest levels without any of the tryharding that you would need to do the same with a blood decay. I think it's just hilarious. I think it's just hilarious that you see a fat naked bear in front of a giant fire dragon and you win and you tank it and it's hilarious too. I just love it. Another cool perk about the feral tank, and I think this goes with the next spec we're gonna talk about, is that you can go feral DPS with the same gear and the same spec and be very competent. So that's why they are excellent off tanks, because in the fights where you do not need a second tank, you can just DPS. It takes me back a little to the Vanilla WoW warriors, right? Like in Vanilla WoW you see a lot of warriors that are like DPS spec and they tank in Fury and then they just DPS when they need to. You can do the same as a feral tank in Cataclysm. I think that's awesome. Feral DPS, I mean, it's fun. It's pretty similar to, like, it's a combination between a rogue and an affliction warlock. You have a lot of bleeds and you have a lot of mobility. That's the main thing about feral DPS. They are decent. They do decent damage. It's mostly single target. It's mostly sustained damage, not a lot of burst damage, which doesn't go hand in hand with the stealth that they have. You would expect them to do more burst damage, but they don't. They are fine. They are fine. Nobody's gonna complain that they got a feral DPS in the raid, but they are not the best either. Okay. If you wanna go for like insane DPS, we're gonna talk about the next spec, which is the Balance Druid, or as real base gamers call it, the Boomkin, okay? You turn into a chicken, which is basically a Walmart great value brand arcane mage with a lot more armor, and I tend to agree with people making fun of it most of the time, but they do have some cool stuff that other classes don't, like it looks so cool. Wild Mushroom, it explodes. That's it. It's really funny to watch it though. I love that animation. Casters are fairly generic in Cataclysm, I gotta say, and I would say Boomkins are the most generic of all casters. Although you are gonna learn that some people are super into Boomkins, like really into Boomkins, like Boomkins are their life. It's really weird. I don't think I've seen any other spec be like that. Who knows, you may be one of those if you wanna try it. It's not for me, it may be for you. Otherwise, the last of the sub 4 specs for the Druid, the Resto Druid, the Twig Boy, the Tree. You are a pretty special healer, you turn into a tree, I gotta say. Side note, they changed the tree form in Cataclysm and I hate it. It looks silly. You're fat now. You are a fat tree. I hate it. I want the old model, Blizzard. I know the consensus is that it's better, but I said it. Cancel me. Anyway, the Resto Druid is like that fat kid at school that when you were playing superheroes, he would just keep making up powers as he went, like he would never lose. They have everything, okay? They have excellent single target healing, even though they don't specialize on it. They have excellent multi-target healing. They have excellent AoE healing. They are heavy lifters in any kind of healing in the meters. They have so many tools for healing. They are a super high skill class and they have an answer to everything, and that's why I kinda like them. The Resto Druid is one of those specs that you never truly 100% master. You can do pretty much anything you want if you put your mind to it. There is a bunch of, how can I say, tiny intangible mechanics to learn, like Swiftment stacking, life bloom timing, pressing efflorescence and sitting there for a few minutes just watching it go. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. It's one of the basedest healers you could ever do. And I would say that if you can never decide what class you wanna play, Druid is the class for you. Okay, and that's why I'm gonna play Druid, because I am that guy. Next class is the Warrior, okay? Now, Warriors got a rocky path to walk in Cataclysm. They go up and down constantly every tier, every fight even. They go up and down in the meters. And if you want a DPS, you are gonna have to respec a few times. The Protection Warrior, the tanking spec, got absolutely gutted in Cataclysm. It's not even funny, guys. Blizzard may try to rebalance it, I don't know, probably, but if it stays the same it is in 4.3.4, it was designed to have a lot of mastery that you do not have, because like that's tier 13 balance and you're starting at tier 11. and as such, for most of the expansion, protection warriors are severely underpowered, and by the time you get to Dragon Soul, the point where this balance was intended for, they go from unplayable to okay, it's not worth it. They also have an insanely high skill cap, they are very complex, they have a bunch of gimmicks. I would say Spell Reflect is the only cool thing they got going for them, and that's it. And Blood Decays have a similar cooldown, if not actually better if you really look at the numbers. So I cannot in good conscience tell you to play a Prot Warrior. Fortunately though, both Arms and Fury are great specs in the expansion, Arms being a top tier spec in many tiers. Okay, the only problem is that they are not great at the same time. Arms is a very bursty oriented spec and you shine at things like clip damage. I would say it is the easiest of both. You have to time abilities in between auto attacks just like a Fury Warrior, but since your swings are slower because it's a two-hander, you get a lot more wiggle room. I think it's easier to execute, if that makes sense. The only real difficult part of Arms is that you get a Slam. Slam is basically a casted, yes, a casted ability for a melee. So you gotta time when to slime in a place that you don't have to move. There's a lot of fights where you move a lot in Cataclysm, so if you take for example Alakir, right? You are dodging thunders, you're going from mob to mob. If you can figure out what time of the fight you're supposed to slam and then just keep doing your other rotation and auto attacking while you move, you are gonna be so ahead of every other Arms Warriors. It's really deep in a way that people don't see, because on the surface the rotation is simple, but it is not that easy to actually do. It is the most popular spec, and for good reason. But then you got Fury, which is mostly the AoE spec. They are also more mobile because you got instant slams, and with your talents you are more favored in fights where you gotta move a lot. For example, Alakir again comes to mind. A fight that is really hard to execute for Arms is a Breeze for Fury. And I am mentioning this tier 11 fight in particular because the second thing you gotta know about the Fury Warrior is that it starts off pretty good, and by end of tier 12 they get destroyed by Arms, okay? Globally they are still good, but Arms gets so much stronger once you get a tier 12 best in slot. It's not even close. It becomes an S++ spec. So Fury gets left behind, sadly. Another side cool thing about Fury, you get Titan's Grip. That is basically a talent where you can have like two big two-handers in each weapon. That's it, it just looks cool. You're supposed to use it. It's like you can get a spreadsheet and calculate if it's better or not. It looks cool, that's all you gotta know. I would say personally I am much of a bigger fan of Arms Warriors. But don't get me wrong, if you wanna play Fury, there is a place for you. You can be decent at it, you can still play. Next class is the Death Knight. I think Death Knights are all about the results and not about the fun. The only fun spec in my opinion is Frost. It is a lot simpler, it doesn't have any of the clunkiness of the other specs, and you can also dual wield, and dual wielding makes any spec 30% cooler. That is just a mathematical fact. The problem is that Frost sucks. It's bad, okay? The DPS is simply not there in any point of the expansion. They may become decent by Dragon Soul, but yeah. You are probably gonna be looking at Unholy for DPS, which is a top of the line spec on its own right. Very competitive, very in demand. It's like an Arms Warrior with a battle res, basically. I think that's a great analogy actually, because you are trading off some of your damage for a battle res, which battle reses are so important in Cataclysm. People die randomly all the time. That's just how mechanics or damage are designed in the expansion. Unholy 2 has two big problems in my eyes. First of all is that it takes a couple abilities to get your damage ramping up. You cannot burst your damage right away. And again, as I said, that's gonna bite you in the ass in a lot of fights. It is not fun. So even if on paper your DPS is similar, that is the kind of fights where an Arms Warrior is gonna take a huge advantage on you. The other problem in my opinion is that your rotation is extremely complex, and it is also, again, big disclaimer here, comment section warriors, this is my opinion, very unfun. You rely on procs to do everything, you gotta keep track of your runes, you are very inflexible in what you gotta do. If you wanna play this spec anywhere near decent, you need like 7 weak auras. You are basically playing like an Excel spreadsheet on top of your WoW. That's not how I play, that's not for me. I do not use my brain when I play video games. I am a Latin American player. If you met any Latin American players in private servers, you know we are all about boom, 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 boom. That's all we do. Finally, we got the Blood Decay. Okay, the Blood Decay is the ultimate sweater tanking spec, okay? It is the strongest tank in the hands of the strongest perma-based Joe Rogan binging guy that doesn't care about anything else but being the absolute best. Then that's the spec for you. If you are that guy, that's the spec for you. I played Blood Decay in the past quite a bit. I hated it. I hated it, and that's why I don't play it anymore. You will be hard pressed to find people that actually like the rotation in Cataclysm. It is very clunky. Every time you tag a mob, it takes like 2 global cooldowns to get an actual solid threat on it. I hate it. You basically have no passive defense. You are all about self-healing to survive stuff. You have a couple defensive cooldowns, and the numbers are insane. You can survive insane damage, don't get me wrong. You can do insane damage too. That is something that I don't think I mentioned here, that in Cataclysm tanks do as much damage as a DPS, in some cases even more. And it is the best boss tank in the game, but that is just not for me. It may be for you. Don't rule it out, it's not for me, maybe for you though. Do you like pets? Do you like sucking at the game without anybody noticing that you suck at the game? Do you like turning off your brains for 5 minutes and waking up from the trance just to notice that the boss is dead? Welcome to the Hunter, baby! Hunters are excellent. No, make it vital for DPS fights in Cataclysm. They are highly mobile, they are ranged, they are the kings of tier 11, but they end up scaling pretty decently too in Cataclysm, so they stay good the whole expansion. They don't have mana anymore. They got focus. It's basically a slower moving energy bar, okay? I'm gonna be honest, I don't like focus, but it is whatever, it's fine. First spec is marksmanship. Now, this is the sad time to tell you that it is not doing so hard in Cataclysm. Marksmanship is all about you, the hunter yourself, not your pet doing the damage, and it sucks. I'm sorry, it sucks, okay? This is always my favorite spec, and in Cataclysm it's just unplayable. You don't have the talent to get more damage when you do not have a pet, and you are forced to choose between getting AoE damage or single targeting your talents. You can't really get both. It feels more bare bones than it felt in Rato the Lich King. It feels like a downgrade. Okay, that's just sad. Luckily, you do have 2 different options for a hunter that are viable. Beast Mastery is the opposite. You are all about your pets. As a Beast Master, you can even get the ability to tame exotic pets that other hunters can't tame. So this is the stereotypical girl spec. One of the cool things about Beast Mastery is that you get a bunch of talents that gives your pet more damage. It gets more pet talents actually, and as such you can afford to literally stop DPSing just to move and stay safe and do mechanics. One little pro tip about Beast Mastery is that if you are Horde, you have to go Orc, okay? Most of your damage is your pet, and you get 5% pet damage from the Orc racial. That is busted, it's insane. You also get some attack power, but nobody cares about that. Sadly, Beast Mastery, while it is a pretty good cleaving spec and AoE spec, it is not as strong as Survival, and Survival is the top of the line spec. It is, you get a bunch of cooldown reduction talents, you go boom boom faster, and it is also the simplest to play probably. To be quite honest, all Hunter specs are pretty same in Cataclysm. They feel more or less the same, but the most notable thing is that Survival brings a talent that increases your party's haste like a Wind Fury Totem would. So they are a very in-demand spec actually. Hunter became a much more tryharding spec in Cataclysm than it was before, but if you are a casual player, you can still play it and most people are not even gonna tell the difference. Hunter is a very good spec in Cataclysm. As a matter of fact, if I were you, as a casual player that doesn't care about results too much, I would go Beast Mastery and I would just let the pet go boom boom and I would go like this. Next one is the Warlock. First thing you gotta know about the Warlock class, they are the ultimate tryharding caster. All 3 specs are, well, maybe not destruction, but all 2 specs then are very deep and complex, and the rewards for your mastery of them are there, okay? Even the suboptimal specs in Cataclysm for the Warlock are still top DPS potential specs in the most capable hands, they are not mine. Your Soulstone is just a normal combat rest now, that is a buff, that is a huge buff. And the soul shards are gone, so if you hate managing your inventory, this is a great expansion to pick up the Warlock. Anyway, the Destruction Warlock is the simplest and thus the worst spec. It is fast, it's all about the boom boom, but the boom boom is not as big though, and that's a problem. But now, a common misconception is that Affliction is the dot spec, right? Realistically, in Cataclysm, both Demonology and Affliction are dot specs. You have a similar amount of debuffs to keep track of, and they both have very complex rotations, and I dare say Affliction is harder, that's just my opinion. The trade-off is that Affliction is much more mobile because you have more instant spells to cast, and in my opinion the coolest part of Affliction is that your corruption gives you instant shadow bolts. It's so satisfying to see that, man. It has the weaker AoE of the 2 of them, with Pseudo Corruption getting severely nerfed in Cataclysm. Don't take that as their AoE being useless, but Affliction doesn't compete with the others, sadly. Meanwhile, you got Demonology, the Fire Boys, okay? The coolest part about Demonology is that you turn into a giant black man with wings. I don't know, I just thought that was cool. Wow, you got a problem with that? It's okay, I guess. They got better AoE, their single target is better. Demonology is one of those top DPSers in almost every fight, and the only trade-off is that you are a turret, you can't move much. Overall, the Warlock is a very complex class. It takes a lot of skill to learn it, but unlike many of the other complex specs, it does pay off to master. Priest time now, okay? Priests are actually pretty simple to explain. First, you got the Shadow Priest. It is similar to a Warlock. They are the only DPS spec that Priest got. The main difference is that they are focused on utility more than a Warlock would. You got healing for the party, you got mana for the party, you got buffs for the party, and so on and so forth. You are a party-oriented DPSer. It doesn't mean that they are bad, they have some decent numbers. In some fights they thrive really, because Mindseer is like a cleave mind flay that you got in Cataclysm. It does a lot of damage. Personally, I find them pretty fun to play, and everybody wants a Shadow Priest in the raid, so you can't miss it if you go. It's a top-notch recommendation again. And then we get the Discipline Priest, okay? The Discipline is a really weird class in Cataclysm. It's always the weirder brother of the 2 healing specs. It's based on defensive cooldowns, on mitigation. No, that's a little weird. You do not heal as much number-wise as the Holy Priest, but you mitigate as much damage to the tank as the tank mitigates himself. You have a lot of insane cooldowns, you have the best shields as well. They are an absolute necessity, especially in 10 men, but they are also very good in 25 men. I would say they are mandatory in 10 men actually. And the only trade-off, the only downside they got, in my opinion, is that they are kinda hard to play well, and they are very unrewarding, okay? Like, think about it this way. If you play a Discipline healer well, people will wonder if you did anything at all. And when you don't, people will rage. And when you do play well but somebody else messes up, people will rage. Meanwhile, Holy is a more traditional healer, is full on meter maxing, you know, you even get a cooldown that increases healing received by, I believe, 20%, it is huge. Your job in the raid is to do the heavy lifting during the heavy damage fights. Holy is much easier to play in my opinion for the average skill player, and their main strength is that the raid healing is arguably the best in the game. I say that because raw output, very few can compete with a Holy Priest. A huge problem is that they are almost useless in 10 men, so if you wanna play 10 men, probably not Holy Priest for you. Overall, the Priest is a decent class. If you know what you're going for, you can give it a shot. It's not flashy, but it is demanded, it is competent. And finally, the last class is the Shaman, okay? One of my favorite classes of all time, because they fit me as a person actually. They are brain dead and they are about the boom boom and nothing else, okay? Let's start with the Resto Shaman. I love the Resto Shaman, but I hate the Cataclysm Resto Shaman. In a nutshell, it is clunky. It is the clunkiest it's ever been. It never shines in either tank healing or raid healing. You may hear people tell you that they are very good at healing the tank and the raid at the same time in the same fight. And I gotta tell you, to those people, you don't get it. You really don't get how healing works. Okay, good healing needs to be predictable and easy to coordinate. If you got somebody healing the tank and then healing the raid and then healing the tank, you are messing up the other healers, and that's a huge issue, even if on paper they do decent numbers, and the numbers are not even there. The Resto Shaman is very much like the Boomkin, I guess, in the fact that you are gonna find some zealots that love the Resto Shaman and refuse to acknowledge their downsides, but they are right there and they are very evident. They are unplayable in 10 man in my opinion. They are at best, they are a side healer in 25 men. They are brought mainly for mana tight totem and totems in general. That's why you take a Resto Shaman basically. But yeah, as a Resto Shaman fanboy, it is really sad what they did. Look how they massacred my boy. Luckily, you have two different specs that are very viable in Cataclysm. The Elemental Shaman first, the quintessential boom boom spec. Okay, simple 3-button rotation, complexity is 0, and somehow you are still on the top of the meters. You have Wind Fury for spells now, they call it Elemental Overload, but that's his slave name, okay? We're gonna call it what it is Wind Fury for spells. You get a 16% chance to double up your spells, right? You throw a spell and another one comes out. It is so satisfying, it is very bursty, it also has deceptively good AoE, and I don't even take the AoE talents. If you wanna be a literal beast, but you have the brain of a literal beast, Elemental Shaman is your spec. 10 out of 10. Meanwhile, Enhancement Shaman, they are more of a hybrid spec between melee and caster. You got a lot of instant spells that are actual spell magic damage, while you melee, your attack power powers up your spells. You can do a bunch of cool stuff like weaving in ranged attacks while you are moving, and then you auto attack in between. It's very interesting gameplay. You get a bunch of abilities off the global cooldown. Most notably, your interrupt is off the global cooldown. That is so valuable, you can't even imagine, especially if you play on high latency like I play on high latency. Elemental Shaman is one of the fastest classes to play because of that. At least ability per minute wise, they are probably the highest. The rotation is more complex than the Elemental Shaman, but it is still, I would dare say, like a medium difficulty spec. Is not overly complex. You gotta keep track of a bunch of procs, but that's it. And you get Wind Fury. Just normal Wind Fury. Melee hits double up every so often, and you got dual wield, so you are doubling up the doubling up of your weapon. So it's really fast. You're gonna see a lot of numbers on the screen, okay? If you like playing Diablo, if you like playing Path of Exile, you like the dopamine rush that you get when you see a bunch of tiny numbers on the screen, pop, 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 this is your spec. I would say they are a B tier spec. They are good, but they are not great. And that is all the classes in Cataclysm. Every class has at least 2 viable specs in Cataclysm, most often all 3, which takes me to my recommendations and warnings here. I gotta tell you that if you are going DPS, do not get married to one spec, please. Especially if you are playing a pure DPS class and they use the same stats. For example, if you're playing a rogue, if you're playing a mage, if you're playing a warlock, be willing, consider having a double spec and changing between specs depending on the encounter. It really matters. That also goes in a little bit for hybrid specs. So if you are, for example, a Druid or a Paladin, be willing to go tank or go healer, because remember that in Cataclysm we got Dungeon Finder. Queues for DPS suck, and being a DPS when you got a bad tank or a bad healer, you are pretty helpless, and that's just no good. Now, if you wanna do 10-man raiding in particular, remember that in Cataclysm 10-man raiding and 25-man raiding are the same lockout. So if you wanna do 10-men, be very careful as a tank or a healer what you play, okay? The meta for 10-men is very unforgiving. As a healer, you are only allowed really to go 3 specs: Discipline, Priest, Holy Paladin, or if you got a decent amount of gear, you can go Resto Druid, and that's it, okay? Holy Priest out, Resto Shaman out. Tank-wise, you are mostly fine, but if you are going for the try-harding experience, you can go Blood Decay for main tanking and Protection Paladin for off-tanking. They are the best, pretty much uncontested. The Bear Druid is a decent at both. I like it, it's fun, but it's not the best. And Prot Warrior is just unplayable. I have to break it up to you, I am sorry, it's just unplayable. Overall though, I think I went through 4 specs. Yes, 4 specs in total that are unplayable in Cataclysm. That is very low for Blizzard standards. I'd say that for World of Warcraft as a whole, Cataclysm has some of the best balanced PvE ever. Blizzard, please do not mess with the balance. I beg you. Anyway, I plan to make a guide for every single one of the 31 PvE specs in Cataclysm. That's right, we are so far 6 out of 31, so you better subscribe and you better join my Discord and beg me on your knees to make a guide for your spec next. And thank you for watching, homies.